Welcome to the second video on how to build a greenhouse. Before we built our foundation, and now we did the framing and the sheathing of this. It's been fabulous because the front part is a greenhouse, second part is the shed, and I'm really pleased with how it's coming out. So let's go ahead and show you what we did. We're now ready to frame out our walls for the greenhouse. This first wall that we're doing is for the back. And our greenhouse is actually going to have a small shed attached to the back of it. It'll be about 6 feet long. And I really want it in there just because I want a place to be able to keep all my pots and different things that's out of the greenhouse itself, so that I don't have to worry about the sun degrading the plastics like with the plastic trays that I use. And just as another nice spot to store and organize things. So for this back wall that we're doing first, it's pretty simple. We just did the studs 2 foot on center. The first one is centered right around the 24-inch mark. Then of course you need to flip your wall around and do the top plate as well. We decided to do a double plate on the top just to give it extra stability. I'm using 3-inch nails with this nailing gun. We cut the blocking boards to size individually, and then we place them at 3.5 feet, 4.5 feet, 3.5 feet, 4.5 feet, and just kind of alternate so that it's easier to put them in. This next wall is where my structure gets a little bit weird, because now at this point, I need to be able to leave spaces to put in my windows and to put in my door. This is the front of the building. So you can't go 24 inches on center anymore, because now you have to go the distance of your window or your door. In this case, I've got both. So you have to measure what you have. For windows, make sure you leave a 1/2 inch gap on both the side and on the top of it. And for your doors, you want to leave a 2-inch gap around it so there's room for the jamb. So that's 2 inches more than the actual door measures. Now we're doing this with all antique doors and antique windows, so it'll be really interesting to see how it's going to work out in the end. I measured out my openings for my windows and my door, cut my blockings, and then it's just a matter of getting them in. In retrospect, some of the windows framing would have been a little bit easier to do before I decided to put in the door framing. So, I mean, if you're thinking of doing this similar design, then I would recommend putting together some of those separately. It'll be a little bit of a squeeze to get in there with the nail gun. But now it's just a matter of putting it all together. It's kind of nice because you're starting to get an idea of what it's going to look like at the end. I decided to double up at the top of the door just because it's a little bit bigger span, and so I wanted to make it extra strong. I'm going to nail the 2 boards together before I attach them. These side pieces for the greenhouse are really the works of art, because you have to make everything specific for your windows. Now I went down with grid paper and I cut out all my little window shapes, and I kind of organized them to try and figure out which ones would work best together. Now for the first half, of course, it has the windows, and then for the last half, that's where the little shed is going to be. So for that part, I'll just put 1 window in, and I'll get it ready for the siding that's going to be on it, and I'll probably put a little bit of blocking in just for increased stability. But otherwise, all of the blocking is going in between where the windows are, just like it did for the front that we already did. The first portion is putting on the bottom board and the top board. Now ours end at some kind of wonky points. I want to let you guys know we are not professionals. This is like us just figuring out how to make things work for us. I'm sure that there could have been better ways to do things. But we really felt like we needed to be able to take this over there in 2 pieces, and we didn't feel like we could easily create it at the site, so it needed to be movable for us. Somebody else might have done it a little bit different, but this is the way we chose to do it. For the opposite side, we're just going to make a mirror image of what we have here. Now, there's some people who could decide to do it differently, just depending on what windows you have. That's kind of the hard thing with this. I can't give you measurements and stuff because you're going to have different size windows than I have. But you know, just figure it out, making sure that you leave that little extra wiggle room on the edges. Like I said, for the windows, you want an extra 1/2 inch bigger than the window should be what your hole is. Now that the walls are all built, it's time for us to make the trusses for our roof. You make them in roughly, well, it's like an A shape. And we decided to have them at a 40-degree angle, which means our little brace below needs to be cut at a 50-degree angle on each side for the bracing of it. Now, if you look at the system that we have here, we went ahead and screwed some blocks of wood down just to help us as we built each one, because we needed 11 braces for this one. And then it makes it just a little bit easier. Then you mark your center spot so that you can make sure that the center is there for every single one. And it makes it a little bit easier as you go along. For the gusset on the top, we use a triangular piece of 1/2 inch plywood, and we put it on both sides. We'll do the liquid nail as well as putting a number of screws in. Then we also have another piece of 1/2 inch plywood that's 5 inches across, and we run that across our middle bracer board there with the glue as well as screwing it in. Adding the plywood really increases the strength of the trusses, which of course is going to be really important because it's holding our roof up. And for ours in particular, since it's on the greenhouse, it's going to have that corrugated plastic on top. It's not super strong. It's not the same as if we were putting plywood up there. We really want it to be strong. This technique for building the trusses was one that I got from John Peters on YouTube, and he did just a great job of explaining it. We took the wall and we held it up where it's going to go on top of our pressure treated boards that have the screws and nuts on them. And then we whacked it with a mallet, and you can see where the indent of the nut is in the bottom of the board. And that's where we're gonna go ahead and kind of countersink, drill a little hole about halfway through the board so that when we set it up, it'll go right over those nuts. Now we'll just continue around countersinking to account for the nuts and bolts that are sticking up and connecting all of our walls together. We had a couple of errands going on, so we had to stop putting up our framed walls. So now we are working at night with the lights on because we want to get it up and out of the grass before it starts to rain, because it's supposed to rain in the next couple of days. So we'll see how this goes. Before we put the windows in or the roof on, we're going to go ahead and paint white all of the portions that are going to be, you know, clearly visible, because we want this greenhouse to have a really light, airy, clean kind of feel to it, but at the same time be a little bit rustic. So we're going to see how this goes. For painting this greenhouse, we're only going to paint the front of the greenhouse where the glass is going to be. In the back portion where the shed will be, we don't need to paint the 2x4s because they're going to be covered by a siding. Before you put your trusses up, mark the bottom edge so that you know where to stop on the roof so it will be equal on each side. For us, it's about 10.5 inches from the tip. I like to use the Simpson strong ties for putting up my trusses. I feel like they make it a lot easier to put the trusses up, and they help you, you know, space it out right. So I prefer to do all of them beforehand and then come up and put up my trusses, but there's multiple different ways of doing things. We put these up so they'll be 2 feet on center. The first one has to be 2 feet on the center, not from the center of the first board, but from the edge of the first board, because you need a spot to connect your 2 foot wide plastic to. We're to the point that we're going to be putting up our trusses. Now, we only have one big ladder, so we're pulling out the pool ladder for the other one. The hard thing about this is how tall it is. We tried doing it the other day and it was really windy, and so we had to stop. But it'll be just a matter of putting up those trusses and then putting the dividers in between them. We decided to put the separating blocks on before we popped the second truss up, but we're not sure exactly how it's going to work, so we'll have to see if we continue to do that throughout. And then it's just a matter of, you know, connecting it to that first truss and continuing on. We do need to add the block at the bottom to make sure that there's no gap there, but we'll have to do that after it's up. We realized that because of the way that we had put the trusses together using the plywood on the sides, we actually need to pull off an additional inch on that peak block just so that it maintains the proper distance. We decided that it was best to wait to put the spacer boards, the blocking in, until after it was up, because it's just so much easier to swing it up if you wait. We'll do the peak spacer boards after we get these ones in, but we're going to get a rudimentary idea of exactly where we want them. We end up deciding that it was best to use the screws to put those in, just because they're, you know, with the nail gun, it tends to make it move a little bit more. I don't know. I'm sure there's multiple different ways you can do it, but this is what we decided on. The next step is to move on to finishing that sheathing. We had put a few of the sheathing boards up on the walls just to give it a little bit of stability, and that helped tremendously. But now we're gonna go ahead and finish that process. We used 7/16 of an inch press board to do this, and then just the nail gun. This is kind of nice because it does have the lines on it. Not all of them do.
So right now we're gonna measure out the width of the boards, and we're gonna use 7/16 sheeting in order to shore up the wall and make it sound. That'll allow us to put some vapor barrier on there and the siding attached to that.
Now that we have some light out, we decided to go ahead and pause with putting up all of our sheathing and do the interior wall. So this interior wall is great because it's going to separate out the greenhouse from the shed, and I already have the concrete portion done, but we need to attach the treated wood and then go ahead and put up our wall. Now the reason we decided to do it at this point is we wanted to leave the back side open, which is why we didn't put up the sheathing, so that we could kind of reach around and put on the roofing material. And once we get the loft in there, we can actually stand on top of the loft in order to put our roofing boards up, and it'll just make it a lot easier in that regard. I mean, at a certain point we won't be able to use it too much, but it should help. So that's why we decided to do it this way. As I've said before, there's multiple different ways of doing things, and we always jump back and forth, partially because we're not experts. You know, this is just something we do in our off time. So go ahead and you can do it however you want, but this is how we decided to do it. We ended up busting out a little portion of the concrete stem wall there, but there's not a whole lot that you can do about it. We just patch it up and dropped a different bolt down to hold it. I think that when we drilled in a little bit crooked, and so if you do that, then you risk busting out the side like we did. Now it's time to put in that center wall. Again, we just need to make sure that we double the bottom plate, double the top of the wall, so that it matches the exterior. When you leave your space for the door, make sure that your opening is 2 inches larger than your door is, just to leave room for the jamb. We also got some corner brackets that we wanted to put in because we felt like this would hold it to the sides a little bit better, and we put those up on the outside walls of the greenhouse as well. GB already put up the joist hangers, and now he's just going to put up our 2x4s, and that will support our loft. I think this is a great idea because it's a really tall design, and so it makes it so we can utilize the top as well. And I'm super excited about the idea of, you know, like putting Christmas lights up there and using it for the kids. So we'll see. And I mean, if not for them, then we'll have it for extra storage. So that's never a bad thing either. Now we're putting on our loft floor using 19/32 of an inch OSB board. And we're putting it in using 2.5 inch nails with the nailing gun. We already put the braces in for the floor. And now we're gonna go ahead and put the boards in, and then we'll measure out and we'll cut our floorboards. And it's starting to look more and more like a structure. Pretty exciting. Just like for the loft, we used 19/32 of the press board for the floor here. We did decide to add a couple of blocking boards to go across just to make it a little extra strong because it's not actual floor joists underneath it. It's not spanning a big stance, but we figure we'd rather do too much than too little. When we put in the floor for the shed, we ended up deciding to notch out the flooring because then we could stretch it out to cover the walls. We had to add some additional blocking because we were using the scrap of our wood, and so it didn't quite match up with the blocking that we had in there already, but that's just not a big deal. We just used some scrap wood for that too. Taking it all the way to the edges really increased the stability of it, and I mean, overall, I'm just really happy with this. Now we're putting the sheathing on the front of the greenhouse. We're hoping that this will increase the stability because this portion here is a little bit wobbly still. The back is rock solid, but we need to, I mean, putting in the windows will help, but with this crossing that line in between the top portion and the bottom portion, it should help quite a bit. We're using 15-30 seconds plywood for this. Thank you so much for joining us, and stay tuned for when we do the trimming and putting the windows in.